I had my hands full with a rat's nest of tangled Christmas lights when the receptionist, Katie, poked her head into the garage. "Circle up, boys. Time to draw straws." "Little late in the season for the Dumonts," I said. My team stopped their work, setting down storage totes and giant plastic candy canes, and came to crowd around the little coffee bar I'd built in our garage bay. Katie held up a cup full of wooden stirring sticks. "Come on, don't be shy." She went around the group, all bundled up in paint-spattered workwear, letting each employee take one. Marco sucked his teeth. "It looks like I'm on the naughty list this year." Chris, the first official victim of the Dumont house, elbowed Marco in the ribs. "Nice knowing you, bud." A year after Chris's concussion, another employee broke his back at the very same property. We've been pulling straws for jobs over there ever since. "There should be two. Who else has it?" Katie asked. "That'd be me." I held up my stick, marked with a black tally. Every year I took part in the Dumont drawing as a show of faith for my staff. But this was the first time I'd actually go out on the job. "Hey, boss, if you don't make it, I'll take great care of the place, I promise." Chris flashed a wide smile. "All right, smartass, you can finish untangling while I'm gone." I motioned back at the mess of wires and bulbs I'd been wrangling. "I've entertained enough of your superstition for today." Admittedly, I did feel a bit uneasy heading over to the job. Roofers aren't exactly known for believing in luck and curses. But the boys certainly had reason to be wary. Most visits to the Dumont house involved at least one close call. If there was even a scrap of evidence that the job site was unsafe, I would have ditched the client. Trouble was, everything was easily chalked up to honest mistakes and slip-ups made by employees rushing to get home for the holidays. Even Chris told me he long suspected the fear around the house was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, that didn't explain everything. "I heard it happened in 1929, Marco said, breaking the silence from the passenger seat. "The owner lost everything in the crash. The bank was foreclosing. Poor bastard decided to hang himself from the banister to tank the resale value. Family found him swinging there on Christmas morning." "Is that the version going around these days?" I asked. "Why? What did you hear?" I bit my lip. I knew I shouldn't indulge it. I heard it was an accident back in the 1970s. I didn't feel quite right to decorate while their kid was over in Saigon. But when he shipped it back at the last minute, they rushed to decorate the whole place in one night. Dad slipped off the roof and broke his neck. Real tragedy. I don't know. Me personally, if I fell off a roof on accident, I wouldn't want to hang around haunting the place forever. Especially if it was a job site. No offense. Yeah, none taken. I'd hope you could find something better to do with your afterlife. I turned into the horseshoe driveway and pulled in front of the old Victoria. The house wasn't huge, so much as tall. A turret rose above the wraparound porch from the left side, easily stretching 3 or 4 stories before coming to a point. "Think we'll need the big ladder for that?" Marco asked. "No doubt." He grinned. "This is going to look amazing." "Glad. I've got you all in the Christmas spirit." I grabbed the clipboard propped against the center console and hopped out of the truck. Marco beat me to the bed and was already unloading our equipment. "I'll get us set up out here, boss. You go take care of the easy stuff inside." He cracked a smile. The doorbell sounded like something an old cathedral would use to call the town to mass on Sunday morning. I almost felt bad for disturbing the ancient-looking man who eventually answered it. He looked as though he'd been tall once, but shrank with age. I could count the wispy white hairs that remained atop his head. "Mr. Dumont?" I asked. "Yes." He spoke with a soft voice that still had some strength to it. "I'm Chuck, from Penter Painters and Holiday Decorating." He still seemed confused. "You called to hire us to do your Christmas lights?" A look of recognition crept across his face. "Oh, how lovely. This is what I was thinking." I held out the clipboard with the sketches of what I'd planned out back in the shop. Pretty similar to what we did last year. I thought it would be nice to warm things up a bit with some more color. He squinted at the page, nodding in silent agreement as a smile lit up his face. He handed it back to me. "Beautiful, but you can leave the top alone." He tapped the clipboard with a bony finger. "That's so high up. I wouldn't want you boys to hurt yourselves. Nonsense. Did he know about the rumors too? It's no trouble at all. That was a lie. But leaving the upper floor of a house unlit would make the whole thing look sloppy. I wasn't putting my name on something like that. We'll get started right away. The man caught my wrist as I turned back to the porch. Just be careful out there, eh? Of course, sir, thank you. I made it 2 steps out the front door before Marco called for me. Hey, Chuck? It sounded like he was around the side of the house. Yeah? I started walking around the porch. The wood felt spongy beneath my boots. Bring the A-frame ladder, would you? What for? Just come. I didn't have to look far. The ladder had been popped open and set up right beside the edge of the porch. I leaned out from beneath the awning to grab it. Whoa, Chuck, what are you doing? It was Marco, and he was above me. Aren't you... I stopped mid-sentence to poke my head around the side of the building. The side yard was empty, save for the creeping weeds. I stepped out from under the porch and spotted Marco sitting with his legs dangling over the edge of the roof. What are you doing up there? You told me to go up and look for a place where we could hide the wires. He pointed up at the turret. You know, you pulled that ladder about a half second before I stepped down on it. Could have killed me. I'm sorry, I thought you were calling me from around the back of the house. Marco didn't answer. He just shot me this confused look like he wasn't sure if I was messing with him. Had we both been hearing things? Come down, and we'll get started, I said. We put the incident out of mind while we laid out our materials. But the second we set up the tall ladder, I got the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. We planted the base out in the yard, and carefully lowered the rubber grip of the feet against the siding at the top of the turret. You sure you want to do this bit first? Marco asked. Absolutely. Knock out the tricky stuff while we're still fresh. More daylight, I reasoned. Before the ghost knows we're here. Marco cocked an eyebrow. Oh, knock it off. If you're so brave, why don't you go up there? He held out the green wire, lined with large, bright-colored bulbs. I snatched the cord from his hand. You better hold the ladder tight, you big baby. With every rung I climbed, my confidence shrank a little. The ladder seemed to bounce in time with my steps, flexing under my weight over the long span. Of course, I knew this was normal. I'd lost count of the number of homes I'd painted. Why did this feel so different? Halfway to the top, my hands began to shake from anticipation. I was actually expecting something terrible to happen. I wiped my sweaty palms on my work jacket and pressed upward. Near the top of the turret, I passed the home's highest window. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the gap between the curtains. Dumont was probably taking a peek at our progress. I ignored the window and set to work. We'd already attached plastic clips to each bulb back in the shop. All I had to do was pop them onto the edge of the roof. 3, 4, 5. I counted it off under my breath. It didn't take long to reach as far as I could in either direction. With the size of the turret, we'd probably need to reposition a handful of times. This would be time-consuming. Over the top of the gutter, there was a small lip with a gradual slope before the roof angled sharply upward. If I looped a long safety harness around the spire, I could walk my way around and fix all of the lights in only a minute or two. The ladder jerked backward, putting me several feet away from the safety of the roof. I clung to the rails, swore, and leaned my body weight forward. My position didn't change. The ladder slowly moved farther away from the building. Marco! My voice shook with fear. I didn't want to look down, but I could feel my center of gravity getting close to the point of no return. When the ladder stood vertical, the fall would be inevitable. Oh shit. Hang on, Marco's voice called out. But why did it sound so far away? I chanced a glance at the ground and saw my assistant sprinting back toward me from the truck. Was he out of his mind? He'd left the ladder unattended. He was fired. No question about it. I would fire him for this if I survived. The top of the ladder jumped back toward the building, almost shaking me loose in the process. I was still out in the open air. As I pulled myself tight against the bars, my gaze fell to the ground once more. There was another man below me digging in his heels as he tried to pull the ladder back toward the house. I knew right away that this wasn't Marco. The man wore blue coveralls and a dandelion yellow ball cap, stained with flecks of paint. "I've got you. Don't move." As soon as Marco took hold of the side rails, the stranger started to climb up the underside, adding his weight to mine and pulling me closer to the house. I swung within range of the dangling strand of lights. I reached out, wrapped the cord around my wrist, and started to tug. The extra pull seemed to be just what we needed. The gutters inched closer. Plastic snapped as 1, 2, and 3 clips broke free. I wrestled with the wires and tugged again, closer. Another clip popped off. "Help!" Marco yelled. Was he losing his grip? I was so close to the side of the house, and the window, was that open before? "Chuck, I'm slipping." Getting down alive would mean doing something risky. "Marco, hold the left side." I let go of the lights and shuffled toward the window. I lifted my foot off the rung and extended my leg, touching the sill with the tip of my toe. I could make it. I shuffled farther, reaching my left hand off the ladder and grabbing the upper edge of the window frame. Almost. My second foot couldn't reach the window, not while I still held onto the ladder. I gritted my teeth and let go of the rung. The rotted wood gave a little. My hands scrambled for something sturdier to grab, settling on the curtain rod. Once my fingers wrapped around the wood, I pulled myself into the room. Without my weight, the ladder sprang away from the siding, toppled backwards, and came crashing down, right through the truck's front windshield. "Chuck." I stuck my head out the window. "I'm fine. The hell was so important you needed to go back to the truck? You told me you'd anchored and sent me back to the truck for more bulbs." "No, I didn't." He looked up at me with genuine confusion. But I heard you." Was he for real? I thought back to the voice I'd heard from the side yard. He must have been hearing things again, and this time it had almost gotten me killed. "Where'd the other guy go?" I asked. "Who?" Again, real confusion. "Hang on, I'll be right down." The musty room smelled like it hadn't been aired out in decades. I could practically taste the cigarette smoke, and the curtains, wallpaper, and linens hanging from the ornate sleigh-style bed all bore pale brown nicotine stains. Dust coated every surface, rising from the carpet with every step I took toward the door. The handle turned, but it wouldn't budge. I returned to the window and called back down to Marco. "Feels like something is blocking the door. Can you get up here, please?" It wound up taking him 5 minutes just to convince the widow to let him up to the 4th floor, and twice as long to let Marco remove the boarded-up barricade that was keeping me inside the old bedroom. "What about a rope? Tie it to the bed, maybe, and lower yourself down," he suggested through the door. "Please just don't make me open it." It took threatening to call the police to get him to cave, and the longer I stayed in the room, the more I understood why. The pool of sunlight filtering through the window shifted, revealing a dark stain on the carpet. The pointed corner of the dresser bore a similar mark, though it was much harder to make out on the dark mahogany. My mind raced. Could that be blood? It was either that or wine. Judging by the boards on the door, I guessed there was a good chance someone really had died in this room. When the door finally opened, I pushed past Dumont, grabbed Marco by the front of his jacket, and pulled his face within inches of mine. "I should shove you out that window, you half-wit. You don't just leave someone like that." "Chuck, you sent me back to the truck. I thought you were safe." "You could have used your eyes, if it hadn't been for the other guy." "What other guy?" Dumont pushed us apart with a degree of strength that didn't match his frail frame. "This isn't his fault. It's mine. Mine and Mary's." He led us down the hall to a black and white wedding photograph. It didn't take much imagination to see that the man was a younger Dumont. The woman could have been a movie star. She had a gorgeous heart-shaped face, framed by long curly hair. "That's Mary," Dumont said. "She always was a pretty girl. Always told me so. And well, that can do things to a young lady's head. Do you know what I mean?" "Do I ever?" Marco muttered. I just nodded. Mary fancied herself the center of attention. I always assumed people were looking at her even when maybe they weren't. I knew plenty about that too, but I bit my tongue. Billy was a family friend, a roofer. Came by to fix a leak up on the turret. I guess Mary forgot or didn't know. She was changing. Must have seen Billy through the curtains, gotten startled, and he trailed off and motioned back to the room. She bled out before we could get help. Now I understand the reluctance to open the door. Sir, I'm sorry. It was a lifetime ago. He let out a labored sigh. I'm certain Billy wasn't leering or anything like that, but I can't say the same for Mary. She always had a vengeful streak. I don't follow. Billy came back to finish the job for free. He wouldn't take my money and wouldn't hear anything else. His way of showing how sorry he was, I suppose. I left to grab them lunch. When I got back, he swallowed hard. I'll never forget how Billy looked, lying on the pavement. Men on the ground swore they saw someone lean out of the window and push him. I thought back to the man on the ladder. I don't suppose Billy was wearing a yellow cap and coveralls when he died. Dumont's eyes widened. How did you know? I think he just saved my life. I refused the man's money and politely explained that we could no longer service his home. Yes, I expected as much. There was a resigned kind of sadness in his voice when we left him in the foyer. We loaded up our gear before heading to the property line to wait for our tow. Neither of us wanted to stand any closer to the house than we had to. When the truck finally arrived, I looked back up at the window one last time. The sash was still up, leaving the smoke-stained curtains free to dance in the December breeze. Someone was standing there, staring down at me. A woman with golden hair, stained black on one side and matted against her head. I blinked. A few years ago, my wife and I moved into our dream house. We went to the absolute limit of our budget to get it, and we have had to cut back on vacations and such until I start earning more at work. But it is the perfect house for us. An office for me to work from home. A huge yard for her to create her dream garden. A nice room for our young son, now almost 4 years old. And a spare playroom upstairs. A 3-car garage for us to store all my crap. I'm a bit of a craft supply hoarder. And plenty of room to expand if and when we want. A few months ago, while we were away for a few days, a pipe burst in the bathroom next to my office. It soaked fully through the wall and completely saturated the carpet. The restoration process was long, and fighting with insurance was a pain. But last month, my office was finally restored and I could get back to work. While the contractors were at it, we decided to have some additional work done. The office shares a wall with the garage, and I thought it would be nice to have a door there so that I could move freely into a workshop I've started setting up. The door is great. I really enjoy being able to step directly out to my 3D printer, laser cutter, workbench, etc. Then, about a week after the restoration was finished, there was a knock at the door. It was while I was working and our son was at preschool, so I assumed my wife wanted to come in through the garage, or maybe ask me a question while she was gardening. I was in the middle of an email, so I said 1 minute, and finished writing before opening the door. By the time I did, there was no one there. I meant to ask the wife what she wanted when I saw her later, but I'm pretty forgetful about things like that, so it didn't come up. A few days later, it happened again. 3 sharp knocks, exactly the same cadence as the first time. I had forgotten about the previous incident until then. Again, there was no one there. I stepped into the garage and looked around. Nothing but a chill. I thought of a few rational explanations. I had been listening to a Let's Play video. Maybe the knocking was actually from that. Or perhaps it was the neighbor hammering something, and it just sounded closer than it was. It was a little weird, but I wasn't alarmed. Yet. The next night, after I put our son to bed, I was gaming with some friends in the office, and it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. It was just a few seconds before I could step away and open the door. It was dark, but the exterior door that led from the garage to the side yard was open, swinging slightly from what I thought was wind. But when it came to a stop, all the way open, it fell still. I stepped into the doorframe and looked around, but I didn't feel any breeze. just the cold, still November air. I had a moment of genuine fear, but I felt incredibly stupid when I realized that my wife was screwing with me. We enjoy horror and occasionally try to scare each other. Remember that one guy whose wife wouldn't stop smiling at him? I shared that with her back then, and for a while we pranked each other by hiding in weird places with big smiles. It was a good gag, but it had been a while since either of us had done something like this. I went out to find her in the living room, pretending to watch Great British Bake Off or something, but really just doom scrolling, and said, "Nice one, you really had me there." She played dumb, exactly as I expected, but I was confident I'd figured it out. I decided the next time she did it, I would jump right up to catch her before she could get away. Sure enough, around midday that Friday, I was finishing up my work for the week when it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I leapt up, but I'd forgotten that I had it bolted and I slammed face first into it. Despite being dazed, I unlocked it and swung it back, but by then she had gotten away again. I looked out the office window expecting to see her racing around the side of the house to the back door, but to my surprise, she was kneeling in the fenced-in garden 50 yards away, halfway through digging a hole for an apple tree. At that moment, a part of me just thought, wow, I didn't know she was that fast. But another part was doubting again. I don't know if anyone is that fast, but maybe I was dazed longer than I thought. At this point, I decided to just leave the door open while I was in the room. And that worked. There was no more knocking for a week. I closed the door at night when I locked up the house for bed and opened it when I went to work in the morning. I stopped thinking about it. It just became part of the routine. That changed last night, around 1 a.m. I woke up suddenly but wasn't sure why until a minute later, when I heard it. Bang! 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 It was so loud I could hear it upstairs in bed. It sounded angry now, or maybe frantic. I lay there in disbelief for what felt like an hour, but probably only a few minutes. Bang! 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 I shook my wife awake and asked her to listen. But then, naturally, it stopped. Nothing for 10 minutes, and she rolled over and went back to sleep. Eventually, I drifted off too, but was woken back up again an hour or so later. Bang! 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 I mustered up every ounce of to hell with this energy I could. I grabbed my pocket-folding knife from my nightstand, just wanting something in my hand to give me some courage, and went downstairs. I paused in the doorway of the office. Bang! 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 I slowly crept up to the door, leaving the light off. Somehow I thought if whoever was there didn't know I was coming, it couldn't run away before I opened it. I reached the door. Bang! 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 I slowly put one hand on the deadbolt and one on the handle, ready to turn them both, and waited. Bang! Bang! I turned the bolt and knob and flung the door back. It should have hit whatever was banging on it. I held the knife up in front of me, certain that my cheap four-blade would scare off whatever it was. But it was only darkness. In my memory now, it was darker than normal nighttime darkness. It was windowless room darkness, bottom of the ocean darkness, thick, heavy, stifling. I held my breath, frozen. For ages, nothing happened. After a moment, I swore I heard a whisper, barely audible. I leaned towards the wall of blackness, straining to hear, when a gust of wind blew in through the door, powerful enough that it knocked me off my feet. With it came the single loudest bang yet. Then, everything was still once again. Finally, I stood, closed, and locked the door. When I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked up, my heart nearly jumped out all over again. My son stood motionless on the top step above me, silhouetted by the dim yellow glow of a motion-triggered nightlight behind him. Trying to mask the shaking in my voice, I called to him, "Hey, bud, do you need something? Are you thirsty?" He didn't answer for long enough that I started to sweat. When he spoke, his sweet, innocent voice was eerily deadpan. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me in." With that, he turned and walked back through the door to his room, shutting it behind him. I returned to bed but didn't sleep. He was uncharacteristically quiet all morning, sitting motionlessly on the living room floor. My wife wouldn't leave his side, checking his temperature and trying to snap him out of it. But I didn't think he was sick. I don't know what came over me, but I only had one idea left. I went to the garage, grabbed a heavy log-cutting axe, and brought it to the door. My wife stepped in to ask me if we should call a doctor, just in time to see me swing it as hard as I could. As soon as it cracked into the wood, my son screamed a shrill, painful scream from the other room. I've never heard him scream like this before. It was like he'd been racked by a pain far worse than anything his little body had felt before. My wife ran to him, shouting his name. I wanted to follow, but I couldn't stop. I swung the axe again, and he screamed again. My wife yelled for me to stop, but I didn't. I swung and swung and swung until the door was nothing but splinters. As it broke apart, my son's screams faded, and by the time I was done, he had gone quiet. Panting, I crept into the living room, bracing myself for what I would see. My wife was on the floor, shaking him awake and crying his name. I knelt beside her. His eyes were closed, and he was drenched in cold sweat. I put my hand on his cheek, and he flinched, then opened his little eyes. "Daddy," he whispered. My wife sobbed and squeezed him so tight that I had to pull her away for him to catch his breath. A few hours passed, and we had mostly calmed down. We have an appointment in an hour to make sure he's okay, but by now he's mostly returned to his normal self. Before I sat down to write this, I stood in my office staring at the carnage when my wife came in. Wiping away a last tear, she laughed out some of the tension she'd been holding in. "I guess you'll need another door." I contemplated for a moment and took a deep breath. Forget that. Let's just put the wall back in. I've always been close to my mother. She has always been the one there for me when nobody else was. She doesn't have a mean bone in her body. We text or call each other every day, and for a few days she was expressing that she had been feeling a little under the weather, so I thought that I would surprise her by showing up randomly since we don't live that far apart. This isn't unusual for me, since she loves when I stop by just to chat and visit. She always gives me the biggest hug when I walk through the door. As always, she asks if I'm hungry and offers to make me something to eat, but I had just eaten, so I declined and told her I just wanted to hang out and talk, especially since she's been feeling bad for a few days. I could tell she had a bit of a cough and some congestion, but otherwise she seemed her usual self. She was never the type to be able to sit still, so per usual, she was up running around doing chores despite the coughing and making conversation with me. About an hour into our visit, she sets the dish down that she was washing and walks over to me to continue our conversation. I thought this was odd, because why would she just drop whatever she was already doing to walk over when we could hear each other just fine? I brushed it off because that's really no big deal. At this point, I am seated on the couch, and she is standing in front of me. We continued to chat, just talking about life, family, and everything else. I started to notice at this point that she was looking more unwell as the conversation went on. Her gaze became more distant. She was looking at me, but it was more like she was looking through me. I'm a bit of a worrier and tend to jump to the worst conclusions on a moment's notice, so I tried to just continue with our conversation, hoping that what I was seeing was just in my mind, or a trick of my imagination, just like I've experienced so many times before. At this point, there was no doubt in my mind that something was wrong. Her arms began to just dangle beside her body, and she was blankly staring, not necessarily at me, but through me, and to something beyond. I really started to get worried, and frantically kept asking her what was wrong and if she was okay. She never responded. Just that blank stare with her arms dangling and glassy eyes fixated on something I had no perception of. I really tried at this point to keep my cool, but I was more worried by the second. I started to feel better because moments later she started making some movement. My relief quickly went away when I noticed her. Only movement was slowly scanning her head down my body and grinning very heavily. I tried to keep talking to her, but all she was doing was very stoically scanning me with her head and smiling. The more she smiled, the more distorted her features became. At this point, she almost became angry, I guess. Her breathing got very intense and her demeanor was almost evil, unlike anything that was familiar to her. She looked back up at me, and I noticed whatever I was looking at was not my mother anymore. Her eyes were nothing but white. Her skin had aged terribly. Her smile was unlike anything I've seen her do before. Her mouth opened, and she let out a sound I'd never heard. The best way I can describe it is as a growl, scream, hiss, spit, and everything in between. This wasn't my mother. At least not anymore. I got up as quickly as I possibly could, and made a run for it to the closest place I thought I could be safe. I am now stuck locked in the bathroom, and I hear her scratching at the door. I see now why she has been feeling under the weather. I am no longer a mama's boy.